Your world building needs characters. Welcome to Worldbuilding Mastery, where I'm to teach everything I know about world building. No AI is used on this channel. Today I'll discuss writing characters, not for the sake of stories or novels, but for world building itself, to enhance a setting. We will cover the importance of characters, how to use them in your world building, and how to write your lore so as to best accommodate them. This will help your setting to feel a lot more human and grounded, and much more relatable and interesting to the audience. Characters are at the heart of any story, and the same is true of settings themselves, as we'll see. Let's begin. Part 1. The importance of characters. So, this video might not necessarily be full of advice for how to write characters themselves, partially because that isn't the focus, but also because I'm not entirely sure how much advice I have to give on that just yet. I feel like I need to practice it a lot more. But this video is specifically about how to use characters to enhance world building. And obviously, the extent to which they do will partially depend on how well the characters themselves are written. But nonetheless, you can have a well-written character without them having much influence on the setting, and vice versa. So this video is specifically about using characters in world building, not about writing characters, if that makes sense. But the reason I'm making this video is because it's a subject that I've not really seen covered or talked about much, but which I think is an absolutely vital component of creating a compelling setting. And I've only really come to realize this relatively recently, and I think it's really worth talking about because I think there's an enormous amount of untapped potential for enhancing a setting with this. Worlds, nations, histories, wars, cultures, etc. All these things, everything in your setting is fundamentally based on people. So you need to include characters in your lore in order to humanize it in that way, and that's what this video is really about. Now, the importance of characters, and including characters, is kind of hard to overstate, which is why it's so surprising to me that no one is really talking about how to use them in world building. There's plenty of content on how to write characters, plenty of content on how to use them in storytelling, but in world building, almost no one seems to talk about that. Every aspect of world building can have characters associated with it. World building certainly can be done without creating any characters. Indeed, I've done that for a long time. But more recently, I've come to realize that this is kind of a mistake, or at least a missed opportunity. It's all well and good writing lore about the superficial stuff, but when it comes down to it, people are at the heart of the setting, and that has to be reflected with the characters. The importance of characters to storytelling is well known, but as I say, their importance to world building, while perhaps just as significant, is rarely discussed. As I view things, world building is not truly separable from storytelling. Characters are therefore of equal importance here. People often say that characters are the most important thing, which, I basically just said that, but not exactly. And really, it isn't so much the characters themselves that are the most important thing, either for a setting or for a story, but actually the relationships between those characters and the relationships that they have with otherworldly forces. That's actually the most important thing. So think of relationships as primary, and the characters or things as secondary. It's a good generalized piece of world building advice to just think in terms of relationships, and honestly, I might go more in depth on that in future videos, because I think it's an interesting subject. Part 2. How to use characters in world building. So, to give you some examples of what I mean by using characters in world building, let's say you have, just for example, an early modern fantasy setting, but with geopolitics inspired by the Cold War, because I think that would be an interesting example. And let's say that this hypothetical setting, will use dragons as the kind of stand-in for nuclear weapons, and also a religious conflict as the stand-in for the ideological conflict at the heart of the Cold War. So it's early modern fantasy, but inspired by the Cold War. Let's say there are two immense kingdoms, each of which controls many dragons, but if they unleash those dragons at any time, it would surely lead to the horrifying deaths of all humans. So instead of that, they play a great game of battling for influence over the many other small kingdoms and fiefdoms and everything of the land between them. So when constructing a setting, you could focus on all the superficial aspects, how the kingdoms work, their political structures, the history, yada yada yada, but the setting will be just as, if not more interesting, if you focus on the characters. What characters, you ask? Well, think about it. I'm not saying to focus only on like one small area of your of your setting, or like just one story. Although, by all means, you can do that if you want to. But I mean also on a macro scale as well. You can focus on the characters. Who are the leaders of the two kingdoms? Who are their most important diplomats, merchants, military leaders, religious figures, and so on? Are there any key prophets or scholars associated with their religious conflict? Once you've written a few of these characters and understand their role in the world, you can really humanize your lore in a big way. You can understand why a certain kingdom made a decision, not necessarily because it was in their geopolitical best interests, but because one of the kings had a certain personal bias or limitation. And this will spark new ideas for your lore. Just stuff like that. You can figure out how character traits would actually influence your setting, which is just very interesting to see. And again, this isn't something I'm especially experienced with, since, like I said, it's just something I've kind of realized relatively recently and I wanted to make a video on. But which, from now on, I'm definitely going to be using this for all of my world building going forward because I've realized the importance of it. So to give you just a less hypothetical example of a setting which kind of uses characters to its lore for great effect, check out The Sojourn on YouTube. You can get a pretty good grasp of that setting by just watching all the lore videos. It's a pretty cool channel. And one of the things that I like about the way that lore is written is that it just does a great job at exactly what I'm describing here, where it uses characters not just as a writing tool or a storytelling tool, but as a world-building tool. So every major aspect of the lore has characters associated with it. The wars fought, the economy, the technology, the politics, etc. All of them have key characters who are influential over that aspect of the lore. And I'm not even that deeply into the Sojourn or deeply familiar with it, but I just think this is really cool and this is really interesting world building in the way that it uses characters in that way. And that's part of what inspired me to make this video. Part 3. Constructing lore to support characters. So hopefully I've been able to express to you the importance of characters to world building, but there's a few things that might come to your mind. You might think that, it won't work for your setting because the world is just too big and individual characters wouldn't be especially relevant. If that's the case, I think it may be worth reconsidering some aspects of your setting and its lore, and I'll explain what I mean by that. Also, I'll note that that's also kind of a mindset thing. It's kind of just a mindset that you can't include characters in your lore because the setting's too big. Everyone always feels like their setting especially is too big, but actually your setting isn't really, in a meaningful sense, bigger than anyone else's, and I talk about that more in my video on, how to world build at scale. So to go back to the example I was using of a Cold War fantasy setting, I did say that dragons would be the nuclear weapons of that setting, so the kingdoms would need to have some kind of way of controlling those dragons. Perhaps this ties in with the magic system in some way, dragons being innately magical creatures. But there are certain mages or practitioners who can control them. Maybe that's how their system works. So you need specialized, you need people with specialized skills and practices to be able to control the dragons. And perhaps there are certain magical rituals which are necessary to gain this kind of control, and they're just extremely expensive, which is why only the wealthiest and most powerful kingdoms have dragons. Maybe fielding new dragons is also very expensive due to the intensive dietary and training requirements, and just raising new dragons is very difficult. And perhaps the only way for a kingdom which doesn't have dragons to get them is to be given them or to obtain dragon eggs somehow. So they're just hard to obtain and they're hard to field in large numbers. And perhaps you need large numbers because, nations with dragons have to maintain a certain number of them in order to have a stable dragon population over time. Things like that. You can think about all the logistics and details of this as much as you want and come up with a lot of cool stuff. But as you write this lore, it can be a good idea to include elements that lend themselves to character creation. So, to give you some examples of that, you could say every dragon has a master who kind of oversees or directly controls that dragon using the magic system. And that gives you kind of an immediate and obvious character creation potential, but you can go further than that. Perhaps personality has a significant impact on dragon control. if there needs to be some kind of psychic link established in order to control the dragon, like telepathically, maybe different personalities would lead to different styles of control. Maybe matching the right master to the right dragon is quite tricky. All of these are examples of how lore could be written to make the magic system and the dragon lore just a lot more character focused. It's worth having stuff like that. For a science fiction setting, maybe the power armor and the things like that they have are very customizable. So you get to see how different characters customize their armor, and you just get to see a different character on display like that. Just stuff like that is really, really cool. So I'm sorry if this video hasn't been as advice-based as they usually are, but I want to start a discussion here. And my hope with this video is that it will have inspired you to just try using characters more as a world building tool and getting creative with it if you haven't already. I mean, a lot of people already probably do this. Maybe it's just me who's kind of being weird and hasn't been doing this as much, but I imagine there are a lot of other world builders who struggle with this and haven't really been doing this. And this is something that didn't come to me immediately, but it's something that we have to work on. So if nothing else, you should at least have a starting point for that now. This video has been part of a series I've been doing on how to world build. If it's been helpful to you, then do go ahead and check out the rest of this series, because the advice I've given in my other videos is just as good. If you're even more committed to improving your world building, then in the description below you can find a link to my paid community, where there are greater resources than I can offer here. The mission statement of World Building Mastery is to create the greatest community of world builders and writers on the internet, from whom the greatest artists of our generation will be born. If you want to be part of that, then that's the place to go. In any case, thanks for watching, and I'll have more content to come soon. Bye!